a beverage of your choice or some snacks as we kind of talk about urban heat islands here. I'm going to share my screen. I have a slideshow presentation that I will kind of go over for the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So wanted to give you kind of an overview of urban heat islands. Emily, who is our AmeriCorps intern, wrote an article that's appearing in the next issue of the newsletter about urban heat islands. But this is a subject that is gaining in interest just because of some of the recent kind of improvements in technology and the ability to kind of see where heat islands are and aren't. So a little bit about me. I'm a park consultant by day. I split my time between South Dennis and Arlington, Massachusetts. And I mostly work with nonprofits and cities and towns to develop parks and help them with all aspects of park management. But love urban lands and happy to help out a little bit with the Land Trust here in Dennis. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get the boring part out of the way first, and I'm going to give you a definition of what an urban heat island is. And this comes from the Environmental Protection Agency, and you can read it here, but basically it's kind of documenting the fact that we have seen increases in heat, both at daytime and nighttime throughout the year all over our country. And generally speaking, a heat island is defined as a temperature that's 1 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher during the day, or 2 to 5 degrees higher at night. And there are a number of examples of naturally occurring heat islands. Beaches would be an excellent example, but most heat islands actually come from human-made construction. And it's usually large parking lots or large expanses of impervious surfaces, such as concrete, asphalt, crushed stone, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit about how we've learned about heat islands, and a lot of this information comes from one of my former employers, the Trust for Public Land. And the Trust, about 5 years ago, set out to look at if they could tell where all the parks were in the United States, because what the Trust does is they buy land largely and then they build parks on that land throughout the United States. So they set out to map parks across the United States, and they started with national parks and state parks, and then they individually mapped all the parks that are in the 14,000 urbanized areas. That's the most heavily populated areas of the United States. That basically contains about 80% of the population of the United States. So that includes all of Cape Cod, and in fact, most of Massachusetts. And they found, like I said, they found about 130,000 parks. But the other thing they found was they could start layering other information on top of those parks and on top of those areas. And what they found was they were able to collect data from a set of satellites called the Landsat satellites that are administered by NASA, that are orbiting about 23,000 miles above Earth. And they were able to kind of extrapolate heat information, how hot it was during an annual summer season for these 14,000 urbanized areas across the United States. And the cool thing about it is with some computer wizardry, they were able to superimpose this on a map like this, which shows a good chunk of Barnstable, Yarmouth, and Dennis, on top, and kind of show where heat islands were occurring and what might be some of the steps that you could take to mitigate the effects of those heat islands. And this information is accurate to about 100 square feet. So if you see some close-ups coming up here on some of the imagery, and your house might be near it and it's shown as a heat island or not, it might be off by 100 square feet or so, but just to kind of give you an idea. So let's take a look at kind of a broader view. I'm going to start with the Boston area, because I think that gives you a good understanding of how many parks Massachusetts has, but also where the heat islands are. Sorry about that. So this is metropolitan Boston, and all the areas in dark green are parks. We have an extensive park system throughout Massachusetts. The state parks alone equal about 500,000 acres, which is pretty amazing. It's a testament to the park and the City Beautiful movement that occurred during the latter half of the 19th century, spurred by folks like Frederick Law Olmsted, but also his sons and a number of successors. And then what you're also seeing here is a light green area, which is the 10-minute walk to a park. So what we have done with this ParkServe tool is we've actually mapped how many people are within walking distance to a park. And the 10-minute walk is basically how far you can walk a half a mile, assuming relatively level land and assuming that there's not a blinding snowstorm or rainstorm going on. So that gives you an idea of what the coverage is. And then superimposed on that is an area of pink. And that pink goes from very light pink to very dark pink. And that pink basically shows you the heat islands that are in the Boston area. So they're kind of in places that you would expect them to be, in the city and in the surrounding areas where you have a lot of roads and human-made structures and highways. They occur along areas of big commercial activity. And they, generally speaking, are normalized for, basically where humans have really kind of built a lot of artificial structures. They also occur in areas that are beachfront, kind of naturally. So I'm just pointing out this little area, Hull, Nantasket Beach, largely a peninsula, largely just sand and rock, and also a lot of homes, but not a lot of trees. So that you can tell is a darker area. So that gives you an idea of what we can actually tell. And all this information is publicly available. It's on tpl.org/parkserve. And you can actually look up your individual town or neighborhood, and you can zoom in and look at individual parks, and you can look at both how many people have access to those parks within a 10-minute walk, as well as where the heat islands are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to Cape Cod and show you some of the other views that we have. A number of ways you can kind of show the data is you can choose different backgrounds. So I'm looking at the satellite background, which shows you the natural view of Cape Cod, and superimposed on that are the green areas, which are dedicated parks. Now, one of the things I will mention is that the database has parks, but it doesn't necessarily have all of the land protected by land trusts like the Dennis Conservation Land Trust. And that's something they are working on. It's a bigger cataloging issue. You can actually add and submit parks to the database by using the tool as well. The area outlined in white is the actual Dennis itself. It's one of the 5 villages of Dennis, as you know. But this gives you an idea of kind of the level of detail you can see, and you can really zoom in and see really almost individual houses, which is pretty cool. And I'll show you that in a second. So let's take that information that we have there, and then let's take a look at what heat islands look for a specific area. So what we've done is we've zoomed in on a portion of Barnstable, Yarmouth, and Dennis. And you can see that the colors range from a light pink to an almost red. There's like an almost red section right over here. This is in the Barnstable Airport area and the associated shopping centers that are around here. That's one of the big heat islands. You can also see there's a heat island along Route 28 and then along all the beaches. So obviously this is a combination of both human-made improvements as well as beaches, which are generally devoid of trees, a lot of reflected material, and very warm in the summer. And this heat information was collected between June 1st and I believe September 15th of 2019 off the satellites, and then processed and normalized. And it gives you an idea of what you would expect for an average increase. So that range from light pink to kind of almost red represents that 1 to 7 degree temperature range that would represent a heat island, according to the EPA standard, which is pretty cool. And it's a really great tool because you can see areas that you might live near that you would expect would be hot, or there's might be some areas that you wouldn't expect to be hot. But we'll talk a little bit more about what land trusts do and what natural areas do to help mitigate this kind of heat island. But I want to show you a few more examples first. Here's another close-up of the view. We've kind of looked at a different background, but what I've done is I've kind of pointed out some areas in Dennis that you might expect or might not expect to be heat islands. So obviously Route 28 is one of them. This is Route 134 up here. This is the Patriot Square and that area. There's also a number of sand and gravel operators and others in this area. So those are areas of reflected heat. Also interesting is areas that are largely dunes and beach. And sorry about that. And right at the mouth of the Bass River and West Dennis Beach would be another area. So that gives you kind of an idea of the heat islands that you might see. I want to show you another example, and this example is of Toby Woodlands, which is one of the most recent acquisitions acquired by the Dennis Conservation Land Trust late last year. And this is an approximate area. This is Route 6A right here. And what I've shown you is two different views. I'm showing you the satellite view on the right, and I'm showing you what we call a figure ground view on the left. And this actually shows all the buildings. Believe it or not, we have actually that level of detail coming from GIS systems that can show us where all the houses are. And what this shows is the area approximately of Toby Woodlands. Apologies to Tyler and Julie for if I didn't get it exactly right. And then on the related slide here, you can see, I keep doing that, my apologies guys. You can see the heat islands, and most of them are very, very light pink. So usually it's probably going to be streets, yards without a lot of trees, other areas that get a lot of sun, that would be kind of a minor heat island. And this just gives you an idea of if you are out in the sun on a summer day and you think it's hot because you might be in an urban heat island, you probably are. But you can look up your own area, your own neighborhood using this tool, and you can kind of drill down and see what's going on, which is pretty cool. And again, this is a free tool. It's at tpl.org/parkserve. So let's just talk about some of the ways in which natural areas, and especially the areas managed by land trusts, like the Dennis Conservation Land Trust, can do to help kind of mitigate the effects of urban heat islands. And what we've learned is that forested natural areas, and that includes marshes, grasslands, and others, actually can do a lot to mitigate urban heat islands. And based on studies done by the U.S. Forest Service over a number of years, you need a canopy of about 35 to 40% to actually take away some of the heat or absorb more of the heat that is generated by these heat islands. The good news is Cape Cod is about 40% protected. Well, not all of it's forested. There are many wetlands and marshes. There is a fair amount of canopy. And this helps to both mitigate heat, and it also helps with carbon storage, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. There are challenges. Probably a big challenge is real estate prices in the Cape have never been higher, despite the pandemic and the recession, and development pressure continues. That's one challenge. Another challenge we have is that we have a wide variety of invasive species, usually plants, usually vining plants, that work to against us in terms of managing our natural areas and our forests. But what I want to kind of leave you with, and what I kind of want to talk about for the rest of the talk, is really what forested areas can do in terms of mitigating both urban heat islands, as well as storing carbon, which is a big part of what our natural areas do. And I'll use as an example a study that was recently completed by a group called the Natural Areas Conservancy in New York City. And what they did is they looked at all 30,000 acres of New York City parkland. And specifically, they focused on the 7,200 acres that are actually forests. And it's kind of amazing to think that New York, as one of the biggest cities in the United States, has 7,200 acres of forests, but they do. And they're concentrated largely in two boroughs, the Bronx and Staten Island. And those forested areas are about 25% of all the trees that are in New York, which kind of makes sense, given that there are a lot of street trees throughout New York. But they store 69% of the carbon in forests, and they sequester 89% of the carbon, which is pretty amazing. But of course, you're probably asking, what do you mean by carbon storage or carbon sequestration and all that kind of stuff? So I'm going to give you a little overview of it. So the idea behind carbon storage is carbon is what's stored in a kind of a pool or a group of things like trees or soil and that sort of thing. And carbon sequestration is the process of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which contributes to warming and contributes to heat islands. And the way to think about it is that carbon makes up about 50% of the material that's stored in these natural areas, the trees, the soil, small plants, understory plants, even dead wood and falling leaves. But the thing to remember is that you want a balance of both alive species of plants and trees, as well as decaying species, because decaying and dead trees, as well as plants and leaves, create more carbon emissions. So obviously, when we have fall, we have lots of plants dying back, and over time they do actually emit more carbon. So the way to kind of think about it is carbon stored in a natural area or a forest is like a savings account. You know, you want to kind of build up that savings account, and you want to kind of make it sure it grows over time. And carbon sequestered is kind of like a checking account. Sometimes you make withdrawals, sometimes you make deposits. And what you really want to do is you want to make sure that net sequestration or net deposits into your checking account exceed withdrawals. And you want the forest to be adding carbon, not losing the ability to store, capture, and store carbon. So what the Natural Areas Conservancy has done is put together kind of a few cool images to kind of show how this might work. And this is a good example of what you want to see in a forest, and what we hope to see as we work on the lands that the Trust maintains. You want to see a variety of species, and you want to see a variety of live species. So you want to see understory trees as well as canopy top trees. You want to see smaller plants, but you also want to see some decay. You want to see kind of that life cycle continuing to occur and change. And the challenge that we have with a lot of our forests is that they need human management. And the way to think about it is they're not necessarily regenerating on their own, like in the days when first settlers arrived here or the Indians were just here. And the footprint on our lands and our areas and our forests was fairly small. So, you need to do things to make sure that you effectively manage those lands. And a big part, obviously, of what land trusts do is that kind of effective stewardship. And really what they're looking for is, again, a wide diversity of species and a wide kind of array of plants and vegetation, and not seeing large trees decline and not seeing the next generation of species kind of come back together. So there's a lot of what we can do to kind of continue to make sure that heat islands don't get worse. And there's a lot we can do utilizing the natural areas that we have throughout the Cape to kind of manage this. So what we do when we work with Tyler out on the lands is we do a lot of invasive species management, and we look for ways to make sure that the older trees can continue to grow and prosper, and new species are coming up via acorns, seeds, and or maybe even human planting. So that gives you kind of an overview of what we wanted to talk about tonight. We don't want to make you too bored for too long, and happy to take questions as we kind of get to the end of this. And what I'll do is I'll just put up another great illustration of the heat islands in the town of Dennis done by Emily. And just provide a couple of different links here for folks to transcribe and go and check out themselves. So with that, happy to take questions.
Great job, Charlie. Thanks so much. It's always really fascinating to hear about what different parks and land trust organizations are working on all throughout the country. And certainly a very interesting project for TPL. So, and it's really a great tool for all of us that are working in this field and looking at areas where they may need some relief from the urban heat island effect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're really lucky on the Cape in that we have, such a wide network of land trusts and a wide array of folks that are, working to, kind of maintain and improve, the natural areas that are out there, towns and land trusts and citizens and volunteers alike, which is really great.
So,
Can I ask a question?
of course,
What was interesting is that in one of the slides you showed up in the New Boston Road area, we could see by the Toby Woods, but it was almost as if there were small segregated pods of heat, and they were obviously developments, the kind of things that we put up over the years. Is that a healthier way to do it than having housing spread more evenly?
No, that's a great question, there's a lot of things just besides heat islands and there's other kind of environmental related issues that would talk about kind of congregating housing and congregating development, clustering development more readily. There's different schools of thought. I'm working on another project for an organization in California, and we're looking at an area of land that is largely industrial, and it's about 1,200 acres. About a third of it is surface parking lots. And what they're proposing is creating a series of developments, but they're clustering 3 to 5 acre, what they call eco patches, which would be kind of introducing kind of small forests throughout the area to try to mitigate a lot of the heat that's already there, to take away stuff from the parking lots, and to try to cluster development. So I think that's kind of the current trend that people are looking at, is how do you kind of cluster that kind of development. And then there's lots of other benefits that these eco patches or tracts of land kind of handle, in addition to just kind of mitigating heat. A big effort is kind of managing stormwater and processing stormwater, and then there's also kind of air quality issues which kind of go along with heat. So it's more people are favoring cluster development. More people are kind of talking about kind of a European model. But for areas where you can't change that, how can you introduce nature in little spaces that can do more work to kind of help you with some of those ecosystem services?
I'm seeing a few folks unmute themselves. Is there a follow-up or an additional question?
Hey, this is Chris over on Apple Lane.
Hey,
So
Chris.
hi. So besides planting more trees, what about ripping up our driveways and getting rid of asphalt? Like what are some things that we can do to help get the Cape back to what it needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, definitely limiting impervious cover helps a lot. And if you think about the soils on the Cape, I mean, they drain very quickly and they don't retain much moisture. And the other challenge that we have is the fact that most of our water comes from wells that are managed by either water districts or there's some surface water. So yeah, anything you can do to kind of limit impervious cover is a good idea. Anything you can do to kind of help ensure the fact that old growth trees continue to grow and new trees can emerge is good. I'm an impervious. I'm a invasive species zealot. So wherever I see multiflora rose, bittersweet, any of the stuff that we cut out on a regular basis out of land trust properties, that's kind of, I'll knock on neighbors' doors and say, hi, do you know your tree is being strangled by this vine? You might want to cut that down. So I think there's a lot of little easy steps that you can take to do that. But just looking at, kind of ways in which you can kind of increase the vegetation is really good, or encourage, the challenge with planting any kind of vegetation is you want to kind of plant it almost in clusters, and you want to kind of give it a chance, especially to kind of survive the first couple of years, especially when we have a drought like this year. So anything you can do to kind of push that forward is good.
Okay, I know about bittersweet, but what was the second thing I need to be cutting down?
Well, multiflora rose, and then I'm going to defer to Tyler to the top, invasives that he sees working in both Harwich and Dennis.
Oh boy.
I mean, where do you start? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll start with the species that are in the upland because doing any work in a wetland usually requires permit. So we're gonna ignore those, even though there's some pretty bad offenders in there, including maybe the number one species, which is Phragmites reed, common reed, is a destroyer of freshwater wetlands, sadly, or it degrades them. But that's a wetland species. As far as upland species, border privet is a real bad one on the Cape, and throughout southeastern Massachusetts. And what's interesting about that species is you don't see it in western Mass. So it's a species that apparently likes a warmer climate. And let's see, what else? All of the bush honeysuckle species, which are difficult to tell apart. They all kind of look the same, but you know them when you see them. There's a really great guide that the state has put out, which is very inexpensive. And it's a little bit old, but it's still very relevant. And it has about 40 different invasive species in it. And if you email me, I will send you the link for that. I probably am going to be purchasing some for our land stewards. So you could also let me know if you were interested in getting one for yourself. And it's $5. There's a lot of great information on the internet about this topic too. And frankly, I could talk about it for the next 3 hours, but I don't want to bore you to death.
Yeah, so you can just Google invasive species Massachusetts. I mean, the ones that I deal with in the Boston area are bittersweet, a multiflora rose, which is a very aggressive rose that was planted to combat erosion, especially on highway projects.
Yeah.
Knotweed is the other one that is almost as bad as Phragmites in terms of trying to remove, for sure, some of them. But yeah, and there's some good vines as well. I mean, we've seen tons and tons of Mustang grape and variants out this fall as we've been working in different lands, and that is a native. But bittersweet it's amazing what it can do, for sure.
Indeed. There was a question in the chat here. Our friend Emily, I don't know if she wants to ask it herself, or
do you want to ask it more readily, Emily, or do you just want me to kind of try to take a crack at it? We'll try to take a crack at it. So she's asking, what about what do you mean about forested areas packing a punch? So essentially, one of the things that we're finding with current research is that concentrations of trees, especially healthy forests, seem to store a lot more carbon and sequester a lot more carbon than originally thought. And one of the things that the Natural Areas Conservancy and U.S. Forest Service study in New York showed was the importance of concentrations of trees and making sure that those kind of forested areas stay healthy. And that can mitigate the fact that, you couldn't plant a tree in all of Manhattan, by and large, that's not already there, as well as portions of Brooklyn and Queens, because they're so heavily built out. So that's kind of the way to think about it. And in terms of invasive species working against us, I mean, the big thing about invasives is that most of these species were introduced at some point in the horticulture trade, starting, early in the 19th century, as, good plants. And a lot of them do not have something that eats them readily, really is the way to think about it, that would kind of keep them in check. And they basically can grow unfettered because they're all great reproducers. They either produce a ton of seeds, in the case of bittersweet, that birds and other animals love, and then expel through normal rotting processes and allow those plants to spread. And when we're really talking about invasives, we're really talking about management. I think eradication is probably more than we can hope for at this point, but it's how can you make sure that you can restore some sort of balance, especially for areas that are looking more degraded, and how can you make sure that enough successor and kind of next generation plants and trees are being allowed to kind of prosper and not being smothered by some of these invasives early on.
Yeah, thank you for that answer.
You bet, Emily.
I have a question if I'm not holding anyone else up. And my question is, especially in more urban areas, you hear a lot about green roofs and the greening of especially large buildings. I know someone that used to work in the field also. And it sounds to me like what you're saying about urban heat island effect is that those are probably not real effective in alleviating that. What do you think about that?
I think there's a fair amount of research going on there. Larger cities like New York and Chicago have grant programs that allow folks to consider kind of green roof applications. There's a number of factors that they use to rate kind of how effective they are. Usually the challenge for roofs is how much weight they can endure, because really what you're talking about are almost kind of ground cover plants like sedums, small, kind of small flowering ground plants being raised in a medium that is fairly lightweight. It's kind of like an engineered soil. And you have to think about what happens when rain happens and hits those plants and how much weight they actually absorb and how your roof can handle it. So there's a lot of kind of calculations going on. Where I've seen it work the best is in commercial sites. I lived in Brooklyn for a while, a couple of years ago, and newer buildings that or retrofitted buildings that were largely commercial industrial that were retrofitted to office or residential, put green roofs as part of their kind of mitigation for building or rebuilding there. And those seem to work fairly well. So there's a good example of a number of them in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is largely old, shipbuilding places and factories, and they're built just kind of institutionally. They do work, but most of us don't have flat roofs in Massachusetts, so there's a limit there. It's much more of a commercial industrial kind of application. I'm trying to think about places in the Boston area.
Well, if I may?
Sure, go ahead, Cynthia. Yeah.
Up in Maine, the Hannaford supermarkets have grass and low-growing shrubs, and because they look just like a Stop and Shop here, they're cement buildings. They support it well. Obviously, the need for more trees in Maine is debatable, but that would be an easy one for here. The Dollar Tree, the Ocean State Chop Lot, places like that. If they had an incentive, they could create a small oxygen producer in that way.
Yeah, so the state has passed a fair amount of climate legislation that has a revolving fund that focuses on kind of mitigation efforts. I would need to kind of dig into it. One of the things I can do kind of as a follow-up, and then I can send any information I find to Tyler, is kind of look and see if that covers things like green roofs and the incentive there. Because really what you need is that initial kind of investment to purchase the right plants and the right soil, and to get a consultant, a contractor that knows what they're doing and how to do it, to kind of put that together. Like I'm aware, like I know as an example, they've done a lot of that at Kennedy Airport. JetBlue was growing huge amounts of plants on some of their roofs right near the airport. You know, there are others as well. The most well-known one that I know that's a government building is Chicago City Hall. They've had a green roof on it for over 10 years now, and it works really, really well. So there are other examples. I know there's a Whole Foods in Brooklyn that grows grasses, like you said, Cynthia, as well as kind of like some seasonal vegetables as well. So.
Cool. I didn't mean to hate on it.
Yeah, hate away. It's kind of a challenge. I mean, there's pluses and minuses to it, and it requires a fair amount of resource to kind of install it and maintain it. Yeah. So you can almost kind of balance, might it be easier to think about, carving out a section of parking and looking at kind of creating a series of, like stormwater retention ponds, rain gardens, or, tree areas. There might be kind of smaller interventions that you could do that might be equal to, the kind of the offset savings.
Any more questions? Okay, well, I don't want to keep Charlie too long, and we're grateful for his time for this and for all our land stewardship work. A lot of fun. If you want to come join us, usually every Thursday morning as well. No experience needed. Tomorrow we do not have one, but typically every Thursday morning from 9 to 11, we're out somewhere hacking away at invasive plants or working on trails or whatever, but always having a good time. So that's it for today. And be sure to stay tuned for some news about the duck race fundraiser. It's morphed into a virtual thing, like so many things these days. But we really appreciate your support in that, and your membership dues as well. And be sure to sign up for next month's webinar if you're interested. Also, sneak peek at January will be on shellfish and nitrogen remediation. So that'll be pretty interesting. Learn more about that and some pros and cons of that approach. I wish you all well and have a pleasant evening. Anything else, Charlie?
Nope. Thanks a lot, you guys. Thanks for hanging in there. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone.